Good day, ladies and gentlemen. And at long last, I, the mighty general, finally get to travel to Corpus Christi to see the magnificent vessel it is, the USS Lexington. I first saw that ship when I was 12 years old, and it absolutely captivated my imagination. The flat top truly is one of the most magnificent vessels afloat. It is indeed like a giant metal city. After my visit when I was 12, I did not get to return literally until this very day. Although I did get to go to Corpus Christi on a number of ventures, however, I didn't get to visit that particular ship. Although I did see it, sitting on the sea like some sort of metal mountain. So now, let's head out and see this magnificent vessel.
Like with the Battleship Texas, you have to cross a massively cool bridge to reach the Lady Lex. And like with the 610 bridge, just remember, the first thing cut is always maintenance. The USS Lexington CV-16 is the sixth vessel to bear the name Lexington, and is named after the famed Revolutionary War Battle of Lexington. The first vessel to bear the name was a brigantine acquired in 1776. The next vessel was a sloop of war commissioned in 1825. This vessel would be succeeded by a timber-clad gunboat in 1861. This vessel would give way to the USS Lexington II, a patrol vessel commissioned in 1917. The next Lexington would start life as a battle cruiser laid down in 1921. But due to the Washington Naval Treaty, this vessel would be converted into an aircraft carrier, USS Lexington CV-2. This vessel would be commissioned in 1927 and would go on to fight in some of the early battles of the Second World War. It would sadly be sunk in 1942. The Lexington CV-16 would initially start life as the USS Cabot, but upon learning of the loss of the USS Lexington CV-2 at the Battle of the Coral Sea, Cabot would be renamed Lexington. Now it's time for the tech specs. The USS Lexington CV-16 is an Essex-class fleet carrier. It was ordered on 9 September 1940, laid down 15th July 1941, and launched 23rd September 1942. And it would finally be commissioned on the 17th of February 1943. Its initial service life would end on 23rd April 1947, but it would be recommissioned on 15th August 1955 and would stay in service all the way until 8th November 1991, making it the longest-serving Essex-class fleet carrier. This vessel displaced 27,100 tons standard weight. Full load, it displaced 36,380 tons, and by 1991, the ship displaced 48,275 tons. As a flat top, the ship is rather large, but remember, this ship pales in comparison to the modern Nimitz fleet carriers. The length as built was 820 feet at the waterline and 910 feet overall. Beam as built was 93 feet at the waterline, and overall it was 147.6 feet. Draft, as built, carrying a light load, was 28.5 feet, and at full load it was 34.2 feet. Propulsion for the Lexington, as built, was 8 boilers, 4 Westinghouse geared steam turbines, with 4 shafts. And this setup generated 110 megawatts of energy. Speed for the vessel was considerable for something of this size and weight. During trials, they got it up to 39.87 miles per hour. Range was also considerable as well, 22,990 miles at 17 miles per hour. And 17 miles per hour is still pretty bloody fast for something of that size. As designed, the crew complement was 2,600 officers and enlisted. During the Second World War, this increased a bit. The ship carried a large defensive armament, consisting of 4 twin 5-inch guns, 4 single 5-inch guns, 8 quad 40mm guns, 46 single 20mm guns. All of these would be removed by 1967. The ship's armor consisted of, as designed, 2.5 to 4-inch belt armor, 1.5-inch hangar and protective decks, 4-inch bulkheads, 1.5-inch special treatment steel top and sides of pilot house, and 2.5 inches top of steering gear. Lastly, the ship carried 110 aircraft as designed. After the vessel completed its shakedown cruise in the Caribbean, it left for the Pacific Fleet via the Panama Canal. One thing to keep in mind about these large naval vessels is the fact that they still had to meet what was called the Panamax Standard. In short, the ship had to be able to fit through the Panama Canal, as at that time said canal was the fastest way to transit to the Pacific Ocean. Even the gargantuan-sized Iowa-class battleships were able to fit through, although there was only a 6-inch margin of error. Upon transiting the Panama Canal, the Lexington had its first casualty during training, thus showing that even when the enemy is not shooting at you, the life of a naval aviator is fraught with peril. The ship participated in an air raid on Tarawa and later Wake Island, and during this time, the Lexington's aviators downed 29 enemy aircraft. On December 4th, the ship raided Kwarajan and destroyed the SS Kimbu Maru, damaged 2 cruisers, and took down 32 enemy aircraft. That night, the Lexington came under assault and took a torpedo on its starboard side. This hit took out its steering gear and 9 people lost their lives. The vessel settled 5 foot into the water by the stern, but the crew were able to maintain watertight integrity by sealing the damaged compartments and then welding them shut. The crew were also able to devise a hand-operated steering unit since the steering gear was still out of commission. Lexington would steam for Pearl Harbor for emergency repairs, and later Bremerton, Washington for full repairs, and would be fully repaired on 20th February 1944. The attack the ship suffered was attributed to an error in judgment by Admiral Charles Pownall. He had ordered the ship to not open fire at night for fear of giving the ship's position away. After this rather devastating attack, such an order would never again be given, and gun crews were ordered to fire at any time the ship came under attack. This attack would mark the first time that this Lexington would be reported sunk by the Japanese, something they would continue to do throughout the war. Wishful thinking, to be certain. Upon returning to active duty, the Lady Lex would become the flagship of Task Force 58 under Rear Admiral Mark Mischer. She would support the Army landings in Hollandia and later raid the strong point of Truk. The Lexington fought off numerous attacks during this battle and took down 17 enemy aircraft. However, she would be reported sunk by Japanese propaganda. During the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the vessel would assist in the sinking of the Musashi. The Lexington's air wing later sunk the Jukaku and then assisted in the sinking of the Jono. As the Japanese retreated, the Lex's air wing took out the Nachi with 4 torpedo hits. As with many vessels that fought in the Pacific theater of operations, the Lexington was struck by a Japanese kamikaze aircraft. This attack hit near the island and damaged most of the island structure. But the damage control teams were able to contain most of the destruction, and normal flight operations were able to continue, and the ship was able to assist in shooting down a kamikaze heading for the Ticonderoga. As one would expect, enemy propaganda declared that the Lexington was sunk yet again. The vessel would participate in the Battle of Iwo Jima, and its air wing provided close air support for the attacking Marines. Her last actions of World War II would consist of attacking the Japanese home islands, and in August, her last strike was ordered to jettison its bombs and then return, as the Japanese had finally surrendered. Upon surrender, the air wing continued to fly patrols and dropped some supplies to prisoner of war camps on Honshu. And in December of 1945, the Lexington participated in Operation Magic Carpet, where she ferried numerous American servicemen back to the United States. The Lexington would be decommissioned on 23 April 1947 and would enter the National Defense Reserve Fleet, and while in reserve, she would be designated as an attack carrier, thus becoming CV-16. In September of 1953, the vessel received the SCB-27C and SCB-125 Essex-class conversions. Out of these conversions, she got an angled flight deck, a hurricane bow, steam catapults, and a new island. With all of these upgrades, the Lady Lex could operate modern jet aircraft. She would patrol various locations in the Pacific until January of 1962. She was to relieve the Antietam as the aviation training carrier for the Gulf of Mexico. However, Lexington did not relieve the Antietam until December of that year. This was due to the Lexington's participation as an attack carrier during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Upon assuming the duties of training carrier, she was redesignated CV-16 and would operate out of 3 ports: Pensacola, Florida, her home port, Corpus Christi, Texas, and finally New Orleans, Louisiana. She would celebrate her 200,000th arrested landing in 1967, and in 1980 she would become the first vessel in the United States history to have women stationed aboard as crew members. Close to the end of its life as a training carrier on 29 October 1989, the Lexington suffered a training accident where a student naval aviator lost control of his aircraft and hit the island with the aircraft's left wing. This accident killed 5 people and injured 17, thus showing that the life of a naval aviator and the life of a naval crewman are indeed fraught with peril. On June 15, 1992, the Lexington was donated as a museum and now rests in Corpus Christi, Texas, where it is visited by many throughout the year. The ship itself must be visited in person to really appreciate its absolute majesty. It's bloody huge and really does sit like a bloody floating city. The hangar deck has a number of exhibits and features a number of aircraft. And peeking behind the corner here, we can see that they are currently working on restoring an F-4 Phantom. As is always the case, the compartments inside the ship, even a ship this huge, are cramped and rather hard to move around in. As you would also expect, the only air conditioning is the sea breeze. I cannot imagine having to live and work on the ship in the hot Pacific sun. Also, keep in mind that upwards of 2,500 men lived on this bloody thing at any one time. The museum itself is well laid out and is so large that it's pretty much impossible to see it all in one day. In fact, for this outdoor excursion, I have done my best to show all of the highlights, and even then that was rather tough. One kind of creepy thing is this high-tech mannequin. It's supposed to be simulating lip movements, but instead it just looks like the spawn of bloody Satan. The flight deck is filled with very cool aircraft, including an F-14 Tomcat that once flew the highway to the danger zone. Looking in on the captain's cabin, we see a set of rockin' Series 70 1911s that are so beautiful that they almost distract from the majesty of the ship.
If ever you find yourself traveling to the magnificent state of Texas, I highly recommend checking out the USS Lexington, as it must be seen to be believed. It must be experienced to be understood. And so, I am Generallotz, wishing you good USS Midway, and good USS Iowa, whatever makes you happy.
If you enjoyed my outdoor excursion to the USS Lexington, please consider subscribing, and if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue bringing you videos on excellent locations.